You're in the middle of a conversation. Everything is fine. And then someone says something completely wrong, and you still stay silent. Your brain lights up. You feel the urge, the need, the almost physical pull to correct them. And here's the strange part. You don't say anything. You let it go. Most people would assume that means you lost, that you didn't have a strong enough argument, or that you were afraid to speak up. But the reality is something else entirely, something that goes against everything we've been taught about intelligence, confidence, and winning. The reality is that intelligent people avoid arguments for reasons most people never even consider, and it has nothing to do with being weak. Let's break this down. There's a concept in behavioral psychology called cognitive load. It's the amount of mental energy your brain can use at any given moment. Think of it like a credit card. You have a limit. Once you hit it, you stop being effective. Everything slows down. Your decisions get worse. Your emotions take over. Now, here's what most people don't realize. An argument is one of the fastest ways to max out your cognitive load. When you argue, your brain isn't just processing information. It's also managing emotional regulation, social pressure, status threat, and the constant need to defend your position. That's 4 different mental operations running at the same time. And the more emotionally charged the argument gets, the faster your cognitive limit gets reached. Once that limit is crossed, you stop thinking clearly. You start reacting. You say things you don't mean. You get pulled into a loop where the goal is no longer understanding. The goal becomes winning. And intelligent people understand something here. Once winning becomes the goal, everyone loses. Let's imagine a scenario. You're at a family gathering. Someone makes a claim about something you know a lot about. It's incorrect. And it's not just incorrect. It's confidently incorrect. They're speaking with certainty. People around them are nodding along. You feel that pull again, that need to step in and correct the record. But here's what you know that they don't. If you correct them, one of 3 things will happen. First, they might get defensive. When people feel their status is being challenged, their brain treats it like a physical threat. Their amygdala activates. Their reasoning shuts down. You're no longer in a conversation. You're in a biological survival response. Second, even if they hear you, they won't change their mind. Psychologists call this the backfire effect. When someone holds a belief that's tied to their identity, presenting contradictory evidence doesn't change their mind. It strengthens their original belief. Your correction becomes proof that they're being attacked, which makes them cling harder to what they believe. And third, you lose. Not because your argument is weak, but because you've now entered a social dynamic where the only way out is to either dominate the other person or withdraw. Either way, the relationship takes a hit. So intelligent people run this calculation in a split second, and they make a choice that looks like silence. But it's not silence, it's strategy. Now, let's go deeper, because there's a second layer here that most people completely miss. There's a difference between being intelligent and needing to prove you're intelligent. And this is where the psychology gets dangerous. When someone feels the need to prove their intelligence, they're not actually operating from intelligence. They're operating from insecurity. And insecurity in an argument is like fuel on a fire. It makes you louder. It makes you more rigid. It makes you unable to disengage, even when every signal is telling you to stop. Intelligent people recognize this pattern in themselves. They've learned that the need to prove something often ends up proving the opposite. Think about the people you know who constantly get into arguments. Ask yourself what they're really trying to prove. More often than not, they're not trying to find truth. They're trying to establish dominance. They're trying to get validation. They're trying to fill a gap that has nothing to do with the topic they're arguing about. And that's the hidden trap. Arguments are rarely about the stated topic. They're almost always about status, identity, or emotional regulation. When someone argues about politics, they're often signaling group loyalty. When someone argues about a technical detail, they're often protecting their self-image as an expert. When someone argues about something trivial, they're often releasing pent-up emotional tension from somewhere else. Intelligent people can see this. They can see when an argument isn't really an argument. It's a performance. It's a defense mechanism. It's a trap disguised as a debate. And once you see the trap, you don't walk into it. But here's where it gets even more interesting. And this is the part most people completely miss. Avoiding arguments isn't just about self-protection, it's about information preservation. Let me explain. Every time you enter an argument, you're giving away information. You're revealing what matters to you. You're revealing where your emotional triggers are. You're revealing the limits of your patience. You're giving the other person a map of your internal world. Now, in a healthy relationship, that's called connection. But in a dynamic where someone is trying to manipulate or control, that information becomes ammunition. There's an old concept in strategic communication. It's called the empty boat principle. Imagine you're on a river. Another boat hits yours. If you see someone in that boat, you get angry. You shout at them. You demand accountability. But if the boat is empty, you simply steer away. You don't get angry. You don't waste energy. You just adjust and move forward. Intelligent people treat arguments like empty boats. When they recognize that the person they're engaging with isn't actually looking for truth or understanding, they stop engaging. They don't take it personally. They don't need to prove anything. They simply steer away. And this is the skill that most people never develop. The ability to disengage without feeling like you lost. Because here's the paradox. The person who avoids the argument often ends up having more influence than the person who wins it. Think about it. The person who argues loudly might win the immediate exchange, but they also reveal their emotional instability. They reveal their need for validation. They reveal that they can be pulled into any fight, any time, by anyone who knows which buttons to push. The person who stays calm, who listens without reacting, who chooses silence when silence is strategic, that person builds a different kind of reputation. They become known as someone who doesn't get pulled into drama, someone whose attention is valuable because it's not given freely, someone who only engages when it's actually worth engaging. And that reputation is power. So let's bring this back to the question we started with. Why do intelligent people avoid arguments? Because they understand the hidden cost that most people never calculate. Every argument costs mental energy. It costs emotional stability. It costs social capital. It costs time. And in many cases, it costs relationships. Intelligent people aren't avoiding arguments because they're afraid. They're avoiding them because they've done the math. They've realized that most arguments have no upside. The best possible outcome is that you prove you're right. And the worst possible outcome is that you damage a relationship, burn mental energy, and end up more frustrated than when you started. And here's the deeper truth that sits underneath all of this. Intelligence isn't about being right. Intelligence is about knowing what's worth being right about. That's the distinction that changes everything. Most people walk through life collecting small victories. They win arguments about things that don't matter. They correct people who don't want to be corrected. They prove points that no one was asking to be proven. And at the end of the day, they've spent their energy on things that move nothing forward. Intelligent people conserve their energy for things that actually matter. They choose their battles not based on who's wrong, but based on what's at stake. They recognize that silence is not agreement. It's a choice. It's a tool. It's a way of saying, without saying anything at all, that this conversation is not worth my presence. And that brings us back to the scenario we started with. The moment when someone says something wrong and you feel the pull to correct them. The next time that happens, pause. Ask yourself one question. What am I actually trying to achieve? If you're trying to educate someone who's open to learning, then by all means, engage. But if you're trying to prove something, if you're trying to protect your ego, if you're trying to win a battle that no one else is even fighting, then the most intelligent thing you can do is nothing at all. Because in the end, the person who can sit in silence while someone else is wrong isn't weak. They're not passive. They're not afraid. They've simply learned something that most people never do. They've learned that your peace is worth more than being right. And here's something worth sitting with. The next time you find yourself in an argument or about to start one, ask yourself this. If I walk away from this conversation right now, what do I actually lose? And what do I gain by staying? Because the answer to that question will tell you more about your own intelligence than any argument ever could.